You mentioned Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I have to ask, man, not many people have done a project for Elon Musk and the team at SpaceX. Jonathan, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a chat.
My pleasure. Okay, so you are the co-founder of Holition, which is a very successful creative and tech studio. You've been able to work with some dream clients from Rolls-Royce to Louis Vuitton to Gucci and others. A lot of people that listen to this podcast, they are perhaps at an earlier stage in building their business, and they'd love to have clients and make sales into businesses like those. Let's start with advice on getting clients and making sales and winning accounts like those. What tips would you have for those that are struggling to bring on new business?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back in many ways to the job that I had. I mean, I think I'm quite lucky in that I've been around the block a few times, and I had a sort of semi-career before I got into creating a startup or building up a startup. And I guess so I was a marketing director for luxury, and marketing is all about trying to carve out that niche, that no one else is occupying, and owning that space. And so a lot of what I did when we started Holition was to try and get that positioning right. Firstly. Secondly, recognizing that we knew a lot about luxury, but we didn't know an awful lot about technology. Understanding that the customers that we were looking to get access to, which were those luxury brands, working out what their problems were. And the problems this sounds really bizarre because Holition is whatever we are now, 18 years old or 19 years old, something along those lines. Although it feels like a startup, we're clearly beyond that kind of startup phase. But when we started up, the brands, the kind of brand names that you were talking about there, they just they didn't even recognize digital. Digital was not even a thing. And it wasn't that they were just ambivalent about digital, they were sort of antagonistic towards it. And everything was about product, and everything was about being able to pick things up and try things on, and craftsmanship and heritage. And digital was just too impersonal a channel to talk about these things. So some of the clients had websites, but many didn't. And if they did have a website, it was really about the location of the store, the opening hours, and the telephone number to call, so that you can go book an appointment and buy an actual product. So recognizing that, a lot of what we did was, I guess, adopt a strategy of trying to educate and trying to support. And there's a lot of hand-holding, and there was a lot of going in and talking about opportunities. And also, and I think, I don't want to underestimate this, I think we've done a very good job of making quite senior people in luxury feel awkward and feel like they're being left behind. Sure. In an area where perhaps they've worked in luxury all of their lives, they felt they had a huge amount of strength and knowledge in the luxury space, but digital drove a truck through all of that. So I think we were quite good at prodding them quietly and saying, by the way, have you seen what Burberry's doing? Or have you checked out what Gucci's doing? They're stealing a march on you. By the way, we can help you. That kind of thing worked well. So I guess to kind of tie all that together, really, really understand who you are, really understand who your clients are, and just try and find those little ways of getting in there that are different to everybody else. I mean, we, quite a lot of sort of, let's call them competitors. I don't think there is a competitor to us. I think we're so sort of broad and potentially sort of unusual in our remit. But a lot of people would naturally pitch in with tech, saying, I've got this piece of tech, or I can do that, or I've got an algorithm. And by the way, I know it's great because I was working with Warner Brothers yesterday, and I was doing something with toothbrushes the day before. And it's all about the tech. We very early on took a stance of saying it's not about the tech. Yeah. Actually, it's about strategy, understanding you, your tone of voice, your personality, thinking creatively about how to unlock that strategy, and then almost the technology self-selected itself at the end. And that played really well to brands who were thinking, I don't understand any of this, but I do understand strategy. I can appreciate creative ideas. And these guys say they've got the tech to deliver it. Mm. We immediately got the conversation into areas where they felt comfortable. Whereas I think the tech crew were deliberately trying to take the conversation into areas where they felt uncomfortable.
Sure, which technical people often do, don't they? Because it's all about logic. Yeah. They forget emotion. They forget the personalities involved.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, I again, it'll probably come out more, but I think part of me being a marketing director is I've always deliberately messed about with the DNA of what we are.
Yeah.
You know, whereas most technology companies or creative technology companies or studios or whatever you want to call them, most of them have been sort of trained into the kind of 10-second elevator pitch.
Yeah.
You know, the snappy "who are you?" So we deliberately took the opposite view, which is like we have no idea who we are, what we are. You know, we only know who we are by the last project that we did, and we'll know who we will be in 6 months' time by the next project that we do. And that was very different, I think. That sort of idea, and it also cued that thought of like, well, the world's changing, the world's shifting, and we don't have a widget. And actually, you know, all of these brands invest so much blood and treasure in differentiation.
Yeah.
Actually, rather than just sell multiples of the same thing to every single brand, we'll treat you as individuals, and I think that worked really well for us. I mean, understand what your clients understand and appreciate, and that was more that creative side. So that's where we sort of pushed.
Cool. You've talked about brand a few times then, which is one of the most important things when trying to make sales. The University of Arts London described you as the Willy Wonka of technology, okay? I don't know if you cringe when you hear that, but I think that's really cool, personally.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually, the University of Arts picked it up because they very kindly, generously, or somewhat worryingly, gave me an honorary doctorate a few years back. But that was one of the things that the Chancellor mentioned at the inauguration or the handover. But actually, it was the Financial Times many years before that first noted it. Yeah. And I think part of that was, well, I know they didn't call me, they called us, but it got hung around my neck. But what was nice, I mean, it was very nice when they talked about it, because it absolutely plays to that idea of using technology in creative ways. Not deliberately pushing the creative, basically thinking about technology as an entirely new palette of tools that creative people can use to do interesting things. You know, in the same way that, you know, artists use brushes and you know, can chisel and paint. You know, we could use technology to create interesting things. And in the early days, we were doing, you know, I mean, it sounds bizarre to even talk about it now, but we created the first ever use of augmented reality on the body.
Yes.
To try stuff on. And initially it was sort of things like watches, and the FT looked at it and just couldn't get their mind around the idea that you can try a watch on that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But we also very quickly started to move into somewhat unusual other spaces. So, for example, just after just before the article was written, we had shown them a piece of work that we'd done at London Fashion Week in collaboration with fantastic friend of the studio, Lauren Boker from The Unseen. We created a dress that was worn on the catwalk at Fashion Week that scanned the mind of the wearer in real time and use that data to understand mood and emotion, and then completely change the colours and the patterns of the dress according to how you feel. And again, I don't think the Financial Times, that was used to stocks, shares and company valuations, could really get their brains around it. I'm not sure we could get our brains around it either. It was a great fun project. But I think that's why that sort of was mentioned. And I have to say that kind of notion has definitely propelled Holition forward. We've definitely had a number of different personalities, and it's something that we keep talking about, this idea of, you know, humanizing technology, creating experiences that actually play to the human. You know, I'm a big fan of technology that helps us understand ourselves or our role in a place or our society, or gets people into the conversation. So when you look at our very, very disparate website, you'll see sort of projects for brands that I think are still very creative and very interesting, and many of them are very, very clever under the hood. But then dripped into that, you'll see sort of more art or cultural based products that tackle issues that, as humans of Holition, we are deeply passionate about ourselves, and that could be projects that we've done for United Nations around the movement of refugees, projects that we've done around dementia, projects that we've done around rape and genocide in Rwanda, at the Guggenheim in Bilbao. You know, the work that we do for brands generates cash, and as a founder, I can choose how we invest that cash. I mean, I could invest it in a vicarage and a Maserati, or I could invest it in things that play to why I did this in the first place, which is to create something called Holition that becomes a vehicle to explore.
Hey, this podcast is brought to you by WeLoveAlpha.com. If you're looking to grow and hire and scale your software engineering team in the UK, then go to welovealpha.com to hire the best software developers on the market. Everything across Java to C# to PHP to Python to React and Angular and mobile and more. Go to welovealpha.com to hire the best software engineers in the UK now. The brand that you've developed is really cool, right? And having major publications and universities call you the Willy Wonka of technology, even though it wasn't something that you coined yourself, right? It's nice to have that recognition from other people. What advice would you give to people on building a brand? We've talked about sales, we've talked about being different, we've talked about having a USP. Branding is connected, but it is slightly different.
Yeah.
How does one go about creating something which is special in the marketplace?
Yeah. So again, I mean, it goes. I mean, for me, everything is about differentiation. So that's we've spoken about that. But really finding a unique niche. I see lots and lots of startups that are trying to sort of sit in an area where there are lots of other companies already kind of doing stuff. And by the way, you can survive in that, but you got to be better and faster, and cheaper to kind of thrive. So for us, it was and when we mentor other companies, we urge them to try and find that unique space. So I think that's one area that's important. I think another area that we found, or I personally found very important, is to be very, very adaptive. Now, my previous career was in luxury, and in luxury, every single step that we took, we very, very carefully and thoroughly reconnoitred the ground upon which we were going to place that foot. And we moved forward slowly but surely in a very, very sort of careful way that ultimately got us to the right direction. I sort of naively assumed when I started Holition that good, clear clarity of thought would allow us to shape our future. And I very, very quickly realized that actually a startup is equivalent to tumbling down a hill, utterly out of control. Yeah. And I guess one of the things that I found very useful was to accept that. Yeah. And to recognize that actually water runs downhill in a variety of different ways, impelled by gravity, but it will get to the bottom. And it's not so much that you have to take one route rather than another. You can take whatever route you want as long as actually it's going to achieve your goal. So, it's, to paraphrase atrociously incorrectly, the Chinese proverb about bending with the wind. You have to be able to bend with the wind. And I've seen so many companies stand up tall to the onslaught and then snap. And I think you've got to be a really, really special person to be able to say, my way is right, everyone else is wrong, and I'm going to stick by my gun. You've got to be Steve Jobs or someone along those lines. You've got to, and that, by the way, that means you've probably not got too many friends, and you're quite a difficult, tough character to kind of swim against the flow. So I think that bit, again, we found very important, and that means being reactive too. That means always keeping an eye open for the next opportunity and not being afraid. I mean, people talk about pivots. Yeah, pivot's one thing, but I think pivot's quite a gentle phrase for some of the lunges that we've kind of made. And then the only other thing, I mean, there's lots of things we can talk about, but I think another thing that I found very, very important is saving cash. I know it sounds so bizarre, it sounds so obvious. I mean, I'm absolutely fixated on cash flow. I'm more fixated on cash flow than sales. Cash flow is obviously a byproduct of sales. If you've got no sales, you've got no cash flow. But there were a couple of times, particularly early on, that we very nearly went out of business because we were too successful. And we had too much money going out.
Spending too quickly.
Growing too quickly. Having the work, but having very bad payment terms. And having customers that paid late. Yes. And so I'm absolutely, fixated on that now, particularly as I get older. I think when you do that, and it sounds a bit Scrooge-like, doesn't it? But I can remember, mentoring a startup at Techstars. They were really cool, and they wanted to raise £120,000. And I remember saying to them, why do you want to raise £120,000? And one of the reasons is they wanted a new website, and they needed a creative director, and creative directors were £80,000, and this kind of stuff. And I was absolutely shocked and horrified, because when we started Holition, we had no logo, we had no website, we had nothing at all. And what we would do is ring up the London College of Fashion or Central St Martin's and say, can we talk to your graphics design course on innovation and technology, and at the end of it, can we offer all of your students the chance to design our logo, and we'll give everybody £10, and whoever wins will give £100 in cash there and then. Yes. And then can we talk to a coding school, and we'll take a couple of interns, and in the end, and as a result of that, can they build us a website? And that's kind of how we did it. And I think,
Yeah.
and by the way, that's fun. It's really fun coming from luxury where everything was about TV shoots and creative directors, and the higher up in luxury I got, the less actual making I was doing. The chance to roll my sleeves up, make my team a cup of coffee, buy them a beer, build things on set, design things. I mean, it was a real second lease of life. I loved it. Yeah. Still love it. It's fun still doing it.
The scrappy grittiness of running a business that way, which I'm used to because I'm bootstrapped. It's very different to raising a few million and spending it on just wasting 90% of it, right?
Yeah, and making sure the beer's stocked, the fridge is stocked with beer. By the way, those things are important. I'm not denigrating the fridge stocked with beer, but
you had a pub around the corner from your first office, and that was like your second meeting home.
It was, very good. So yes, so as we started to kind of grow, we started to push out of our office, and there's a famous pub, which is called the Mitre down in Alley, and they had a kind of a room, and they knew us so well that we'd just ring them up and we'd book out that room. We'd have board meetings there, but we'd also use it as a creative breakout. And I think this comes down to, again, I hope we're known as a creative studio, and again, how do we foster creativity? And as a studio, we're very, very multidisciplinary. We've got lots of very different skills. And how do we and by the way, each of those skills are very different, and they don't automatically blend. They don't automatically sort of work together. A mathematician often doesn't work with a filmmaker, or a psychologist won't necessarily work with a data scientist, or an anthropologist won't necessarily work typically with an artist. So how do we do that? And we found, it sounds mad, doesn't it? But the pub became a very important part of that. And 2 or 3 nights a week, there'd be little gangs of people drifting down to talk about projects. And, serendipity occurs. I love that sort of moment when, I get a brief from, Chanel, and I can chuck it into a room with a mathematician, a front-end developer, and a data scientist, and a graphic designer. And what comes out is like wrong, completely wrong. But because I work in luxury, I can maneuver that idea onto where I think the kind of delineation or the parameter of Chanel's a sort of appetite for innovation lies, and we can sort of get work that way. And I think, and one more thing about the universities is almost still pretty well 100% we recruit. So the humans of Holition come straight from university. And that might mean that they come to us aged 27 with a PhD in computer science, or 22 with an MA in fashion psychology from London College of Fashion. But another kind of, not rigid rule, but a kind of another rule that I laid down quite early on was I didn't want people from luxury fashion and beauty working for me, because I didn't really want anybody that had been sort of, and this is really unfair, but preconditioned by large scary brands to say no. Whereas all the boys and girls that work for me, they're all full of ideas, and we try, and my job is to make sure that there are no kind of no mechanisms in place to diminish that, where everybody can say whatever they want and come up with ideas, and then together we'll work. We'll build off each other's ideas, and we'll end up in this great space where a great project for a client hopefully emerges.
Sure. One thing that I'm curious about is, as well as running your business, you have a lot of other side projects. You were the visiting professor at the University of Arts London. You've been a mentor for Techstars. You've previously been a mentor for the British School of Fashion, for the British Fashion Council, the Tate Art Galleries. I love the Tate, by the way. How do you deal with time management, and how do you get all of that done and not like completely fail at everything? Because I would struggle.
Well, I'm not saying I succeed, but I guess there's a couple of things there. So one is, obviously I've got a very good team. And there's not a lot of hierarchy. So I've got I've got a management team. There are heads of departments. We're not particularly big, but I trust them completely implicitly. But also we've got very, very good boys and girls. So first of all, I know that I can disappear off an afternoon, and all of that's going to work. So that's important. And then obviously, if there are important things going on, Holition takes priority. But what I very quickly found is, and I'm sure everybody's the same, right? You need. Well, I definitely need a yang to the yin. I need alternatives, and it was because I was feeling stifled and pressured and constrained by a career in luxury that I needed to do something myself. And once the cork was out the bottle and the genie was roaming wild and free, I really enjoyed the liberation. So that's kind of one thing. I think the second thing is certainly and I imagine most people, we're all about ideas. And I feel very privileged to have met one or two people in my life who I think you could say are genuine geniuses. We talked about Elon Musk.
Yeah.
We talked about, I'm talking about Lee McQueen.
Yeah.
People I didn't meet Steve Jobs. He must have been extraordinary. They have this kind of, well, I was going to say they have this aura about them, but unfortunately, poor Alexander McQueen, Lee McQueen, he didn't have that confidence, and that was one of the issues. But they are extraordinary people. But the rest of us mere mortals, we get through life, or we create by that magical moment when two people come together and have a third idea that they wouldn't have had between them. And
yes,
that's how mankind crawled out of the primordial ooze. And I'm big believers in that.
Yes.
That's why we are this multidisciplinary studio where different people of different backgrounds, they can come together and create. I'm the same. So I need to be able to talk to London College of Fashion. I need to be able to talk to students. I just like talking to people. And a lot of the ideas that we have come from those. I'll like all of us, you'll take something, you'll join it to something else, and then something else will come along. And that kind of thing is interesting. Yeah.
That's what creativity is, right?
Yeah.
Combining different ideas from different sectors in new and unique ways. You're not inventing anything new.
No.
You're just combining the old into newish ways of doing
repackaging it a bit. And actually maybe that's another answer to the very first question you asked me about, like, what you do when you start a business.
Yeah.
You need to have a few stories.
Yes.
You need to be able to create those stories. And and part of the narrative, the input are those collaborations that I do, or the artists that I meet, or the organisations that I can get involved with. I think that's a really important part of it. And then the only other advice I would give, which we did right at the beginning, and I'm sure this is happening for everybody now, but every single opportunity to speak, we took. No matter what it was, where it was, whether it was paid or whether it wasn't, whether it was raining, sunny, whether it was like the UK packaging show, didn't really matter what it was.
Yeah.
Every single opportunity to speak, I encouraged my team to do the same. We always turn up and speak. Yeah. And one of the reasons for that is, a bit like, basically, your story, you don't just kind of tell it. It builds, a bit like that broom in Only Fools and Horses with 28 handles. And basically, it's like my great aunt's stew. It's constantly being added to, and there's nothing better at forcing you to tell that, to recognize, to work out what that story is, than the pressure of standing up on stage in front of several hundred complete strangers and talking about what you do. And so the preparation for that gets you thinking about who you are, what you do, what are the stories, what works, what doesn't. And then you just carry that through. It changes and it evolves over time. But I've got one deck that every conference I do, it's the same deck.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's never it's now a very different deck from when I first did it, but it's the same deck.
Yes.
Few things added, few things taken away every year.
Cool. I love that. You mentioned Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I have to ask, man, not many people have done a project for Elon Musk and the team at SpaceX. Tell me a little bit about that story.
I mean, there's not a huge amount to say, I should say. It was a project working again with Lauren. It was that dress that changed colour according to not air quality, that was another project that we did, according to data to your mind. Yeah. The original iteration of that went into the Barbican.
Okay.
And it wasn't about scanning data from the mind, just looking for data. Just looking for any source of data. And Elon had data. He had data. I presume that I'm trying to remember back now. I think it was the Starlink, satellites,
yes.
Tracking satellites, and they also had sensors going out into space, and they were measuring sort of solar flares and radiation storms and whatever other space weather, shall we say. And we were having a conversation around what kind of data should we get. One of the team said, "Oh, by the way, Elon Musk just saw an article that said he had this kind of data," and we said, "Well, let's get one of the interns to contact them." Over a game of poker. We were playing poker. We used to play a lot of poker in the studio to get people working together.
And they gave it to you, the data?
And we had a phone call. Yeah,
Blimey,
we had a phone call, and we sort of from his office, he was interested. He'd seen it, and. So that's what drove that data. We had a very limited amount of data. So I mean, he was extraordinary. One of the things I thought was really interesting about him is he was, there was an end of the meeting and he was talking about I don't know what he's talking about. It was some science thing. And there's a lot of people there that were clearly very smart scientists.
Yes.
And it was one of those meetings where he was obviously pressing back on what they were saying or challenging in a good way. I didn't see any sort of maliciousness. And they were saying, well, the reason is this. And he was saying, yeah, but fair enough, but why this? And then they would say, well, because of that. And he would say, well why that? And so he kept pushing back and challenging like their premise.
Yes.
And in the end, he'd worked it all the way back to kind of like, there's no more to say.
Okay.
And then he said, right, now let's rebuild it in a different way.
First principles.
What if we do it in a different way?
Yeah.
And it was amazing to watch. It was and you have to have that charisma to kind of do it. But it reminded me a little bit of a project that we did around dementia, where we were working with an amazing scientist called Dr. Kate Story, who's one of the leading scientists in this space of dementia. And one of the things that she had just done was that she had imaged a process in the brainstem, which was basically. So basically this is quite simplified, but deliberately quite simplified. So in the brainstem, the brain cells have to disconnect. They drift away. And by drifting away, they can kind of re-emerge. They can sort of, by that notion of disconnecting and decompressing means that they can heal and then they reattach healed. And if they don't detach, well, that's what causes dementia. They don't heal. They have to disconnect to kind of heal. And talking to her about this project, all of her life work came out, everything, all of the research, all of the seminars, all of the awards. Yeah. You know, she couldn't explain it in a simple, cogent way. Sure. She had to explain it in the way that mattered to her, which was this huge, encompassing, all-enveloping sort of theory. So our job was to kind of simplify that, and that's what Elon Musk did. He took, you know, what would have been probably cumulatively 400 years of scientific experience and just gently pushed it back to the beginning and then rebuilt it in a slightly different way.
With SpaceX, Elon Musk has done incredible things in aviation, I suppose. Before you were in business, you had a career in flying as well.
I did. Well, I almost had a career in flying. So I was rather bizarrely sort of very keen to fly airplanes.
Yes.
Well, no, not very bizarrely, because that bit was not bizarre. I will go back to flying airplanes at some point. The only way as a kid I could fly airplanes was by joining the Air Force. So a flying scholarship. I was in University Air Squadron at university and did a lot of flying. And then in the end, I think it was clear that as I was getting older and going through university and trying to work out who Jonathan was, actually I wasn't right for the Air Force, and I think the Air Force probably realised that I wasn't right for them either. Sure. But I still retained that kind of love of flying. But so I'm on basically my third career. Yes. A bit of flying, bit of luxury, bit of innovation. Yeah. I'm not quite sure how I got from the Air Force into luxury. I feel really awful because quite often I'll get students at universities coming up saying, the brands that you talked about, those are the kind of brands that I aspire to work for. How did you get into luxury? And unfortunately, the answer is I almost literally just fell into an office kind of, and said, right, well, I'll work here and work my way out.
Well, you mentioned Steve Jobs. He famously once said, it's really hard to connect those dots looking forward. You have to kind of look backwards, and that's kind of what you're doing there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do meet students that have got this absolutely rigid plan. It goes back to what I was saying about bending and being kind of flexible. So, they will do this and they will then get that job and that will get them to there and they'll sort of, become the new sort of creative director of Galliano or whatever. So, and all, it's very difficult to talk to them in a way that is realistic without sort of demotivating them.
Sure.
But what we do, but one thing it has done is that it really changed the way that Holition looked at internships, because it is difficult out there. Yeah. We get a lot of people asking for interns, and and often those interns come in for a few days. They want to put something on their CV, but they're not there for very long, so they'll make the coffee, they'll answer the calls, they'll do some running around, whatever it is, and then they'll go off onto the next one. And that means really nothing to me at all. And I always feel that an internship is a contract between a young person and us. And in any contract, there's got to be give and take. Both sides have got to get something tangible out of it. We've got to get something tangible because we will be investing a lot of our time that could be going into projects. And it does take time. but they're investing some of their time. They could be on a beach in Spain or doing whatever they want to be doing, and they're choosing to spend it with us. So what we've now done is we've tried to, over the last few years, we've taken all of the intern names that we get that approach us, and then we have a little look. And what we try and do is create a little mini Holition of about sort of 8 or 9 people over summer. And we'll have some software developers, we'll have some creatives, some strategists, some data specialists, some students who are specializing in AI. And usually they'll come from UK universities, but we're also very close to Brown University in the US, but then London School of Economics, London College of Fashion, Central St Martin's, University of Cambridge, Imperial or UCL on the coding side. We just got these connections to these universities. And then what we do is we put them onto an actual project, a non-commercial project, but a project that's actually interesting and got a proper launch. Yeah. So one of the ones that we did, they ended up with a digital installation that was projected all over Somerset House during London Fashion Week.
Okay, cool.
Another one that we did, they created a piece of data art, and that was shown in the Turbine Hall at the Tate. You know, so they can actually say, I did that, I worked on that. And I think, again, that's important for us. And then, hey, it's beneficial to us because many of them want to stay.
A lot of the technologies that you've mentioned there, Jonathan, are quite futuristic and cutting edge. You've got a division in your company called Beauty by Holition, which uses augmented reality to, I guess, make people look more beautiful. Maybe I need this. Tell me a little bit more about that, because not many agencies and studios have a product division and something as exciting as AR.
Yeah, it's happened deliberately by accident. That's not an oxymoron. So I said some of the first stuff that we were doing, the first projects that we did were using AR. And the very first project we ever did was this watch project for Tissot. And then we did a few projects that were sort of what you might call hard-edged AR that required CAD models. So shoes for Vans, jewelry for De Beers and for Tiffany, more watches. We did some puffer jackets for North Face. We're talking 12, 13 years ago, right at the beginning of all of this. And one of the problems is creating the CAD model took quite a lot of time, and time was money's, and therefore we could create an application that might have 3 or 4 products in. And brands kept saying, but I've got 20,000 items. I need them all in there, and it was never going to happen. The size was going to be too big, the cost of it was too big. And then we did a project for Uniqlo up and down the West Coast of America in California, where you would stand in front of a mirror wearing a Uniqlo product. The mirror would know what the product was, and then show it, you wearing it in any color. So we were taking you, but we were changing the color. And it worked with Uniqlo because most of the products were single flat color. Yeah. So we could take a blue hoodie and we could make it green and white and red and all the rest of it. And we got quite interested in that because we weren't using CAD models, we were just using color, and that's 2D. So ultimately you could have almost infinite number of products. That led us into thinking, right, what other products use color, beauty? So we created a proof of concept back in 2011. And did some augmented reality beauty trials. We were the first people to do it in real time. But as a creative studio, rather than commercialize it, we did it and then moved on to something else. Yeah. And what we would do with that augmented reality technology is, if we came back to it, is we would take it and then try and get it doing something else, and then doing something else, and then doing something else. Now, about 5 years ago, we had done so many something else uses with it that when we kind of collected it all together metaphorically, we actually had a SaaS product in there, buried in there. So it just made sense to recreate it as a SaaS product and then sell that. And then you're right, it sits on the periphery. It's a division of Holition. I mean, division sounds very grand. It's some people within it. It's more of the humans of Holition, but with a SaaS product. Holition uses that SaaS product to create individual bespoke things. And they also sell that SaaS product to other brands and other kind of groups. And again, it just shows a few things. One, the disparate nature of what we do. 2, that idea of bending and pivoting and looking for where the value is, because in the end, it's all about survival. Yeah. But also, it's an interesting tool. Yeah. And particularly, with the sort of spin-off areas are interesting. And I mean, where the creative side of Holition is very interested in, for example, that slightly dystopian space of sort of online view of perfection versus like the reality, and whether that leads to kind of low self-esteem. And we've used that tool in art-based projects to explore that area. We've used that tool to explore kind of in user testing, using face tracking and things. And it makes some money, and it covers itself too. And we've had interest in people acquiring that bit or looking at that bit. So it just gives us it's just another sort of slightly unusual kind of diversion on that journey.
Similar to augmented reality, we obviously have virtual reality. One of the things that I'm very interested in as a metaverse geek is how fashion will be disrupted by VR. I don't know much about fashion. I wear my own branded merch 90% of the time, which makes my wardrobe very, very simple and easy.
Well, Steve Jobs-esque.
I don't. I'm trying to copy Steve Jobs, but I do think he had a point in keeping it simple. Literally, my wardrobe is 90% of it is my wife kind of filling it up.
And we're men, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. But I order the same jeans 5 times, the same t-shirt 10 times, sort of thing. But I'm very interested in
how... And that's good, by the way.
Well, it's one less thing to think about.
Yeah.
Less decision fatigue.
Yeah. Particularly in the mornings.
Exactly, man. Yeah. Like NFT clothing, it kind of seems like a bit of a joke at the moment, but in a decade, I really do believe that people will be spending real money to kind of wear the latest virtual, clothing and uniform. And I'm sure you've seen like Ready Player One and those types of arguably dystopian future, if you view it from that lens. But what are your thoughts on the future of fashion being disrupted by the metaverse? That's not a sentence that I thought I would ever say 5 years ago, but you know this space almost better than anybody. What's your view on what's going to happen in that realm?
So fashion will say absolutely not, and Jonathan says absolutely yes.
Okay.
And I think there's a number of ways to sort of tackle that. So the first way to tackle it is, and I'm saying this as an innovator in the fashion space, if you could choose any sector to innovate in, fashion should be the last one you should ever choose to innovate in. And one of the reasons for that is fashion is also an innovator. Fashion not by definition, but by practice, is constantly changing.
Yeah.
Dior does not put last year's clothes on next year's, catwalk, and every new collection that drops is the new collection, and everything else is old. And a few months later, the next collection will come along, and today's collection is old. And when we started working with them, what we found is, we would do something in augmented reality, thinking, wow, we've made that work. We're in.
Yeah.
Fashion for you was like, done that now. What's next? What else have you got? And I think if you just look at the catwalks, there was, 1 year is all about drones, 1 year is all about holography, then it was all about AI, then it was all about hyper-personalization, then it was all about something else and something else and something else. And fashion is constantly moving on to the next thing, leaving a lot of, carnage and chaos in the tech world in its wake, not realizing, maybe not even caring how much effort goes into creating that first technical innovation before they're moving on to something else. So it's not surprising to me that the metaverse is dead as far as fashion were concerned, because they were all over it last year or the year before. We did a fashion show, Metaverse, for Tommy Hilfiger at New York Fashion Week in September 2022. So that's the kind of background. My view on it is twofold. One is, well, the metaverse can't be dead. It never existed, right? Sure. Yeah. The idea of like one unified, all-encompassing digital world where you can flit seamlessly in from social to shopping to wherever, and all the rest of it on any device, where there are no barriers to entry there, that hasn't happened. What we've got are a load of small, self-contained with kind of rigid walls around them, sort of mini metavi, or whatever the term is, I'm not sure. Yeah. None of which are connected. You've got to leave one to join another, and that there's a lot of friction in that, and it's not going to work. But I think the other thing to say, and again, as a sort of human-centered design studio, which is what we are, we're very interested in them. We are really interested in the metaverse, and we're interested in it because, like, we don't, in the real world, there are a number of different ways that you can describe core human needs, but one simple way is we all need to play, we all need to acquire, whether that's products, hoodies, knowledge, insight, love. Yeah. We all need to connect, companionship, or to make us feel that we're not all on our own, but we're part of something bigger. And we all need to play. Those kind of 4 human needs are kind of the ones that we exhibit as we walk around the real world. those are the ones that we'll be exhibiting in the digital world. And we're all increasingly digitized, obviously. We're spending most of our time on digital. And those needs will be delivered by the metaverse. At the moment, bits of those needs are being delivered by different apps. So you join them all together, and it just seems completely obvious to me. And if you are going to be roaming around in the metaverse, in whatever form that takes, you're going to want to do your stuff. You're going to want to have your individuality, your personalization, and that doesn't necessarily just mean we're going to look like those awful sort of naive Mark Zuckerberg kind of play characters. Yeah. We're going to want to be characters that we think are as individual as we are in real life. I mean, I still find it extraordinary that everywhere we go in the world, I don't think we've ever met someone that looks like us, dresses like us, talks like us, behaves like that. We're all so individual. Yeah. And actually, there's a lot of homogeneity in the metaverse at the moment because the tools aren't built yet. But
sure.
but that will kind of change. I think then, if you can get to that point, then the interesting bit is you're starting to understand the metaverse not as a place that you disappear into, but actually as something that's joined to the real world. Yeah. And I think that's where we get very interested in, a place where you can jump into and jump out of. And then you start thinking about, well, a few years ago when we created our digital avatars, they were basically representations of us, like Bitmoji and stuff like that. Yeah. Now, a lot of people are creating avatars that are utterly different. It's an opportunity, it's a sandboxed area to explore different sides of your personality, different ideas. Sometimes bad ideas, sometimes, to be able to do things in the metaverse that you wouldn't do in the real world. Yeah. We're very interested then as you re-emerge into the real world. Like, what does that mean? Does that change you? I mean, I'll give you some examples. When the fashion show we did with Tommy Hilfiger, we were lead creative agency, and there was a normal show in Brooklyn with like Kardashians and Kate Moss and Snoop Dogg and his son on the front row. And,
all your best friends.
All the besties.
Yeah.
Travis, Mr. Kardashian, was playing drums as the models came out, and it was great fun. It was great fun until I had to go off and tell Kourtney Kardashian to sit down because we're trying to get the show going. And one of the reasons why I had to ask her to sit down and get the show going was simultaneously there was a Roblox world. Okay. So the show was
a video game.
Yeah, exactly. But the two were conjoined. So the moment the models walked out along the real catwalk, an identical sort of 60-foot virtual model in the Roblox world would walk across the Brooklyn Bridge and into Manhattan, and all these models fanned out, and every virtual model had a superpower. So if you were playing Roblox and you went near one of them, you could start flying or you could start running fast. And at the end of the show, timed in sequence with the fashion show, all of these models were in the Rockefeller Center, and there was a kind of after party with Travis playing drums, and it was really, really, really good fun. When we designed the digital world, the Roblox world, we were thinking, right, let's have these really big, kind of beautiful models. Tommy Hilfiger want the most realistic, hyper-realistic models. But the Roblox community said, no, we want our little blocky characters. And so what we did in the end was explore that and just have a range of very different characters. We had blocky characters, tall characters, beautiful characters, green characters that were bunny rabbits and other, there's a real mix. And when Tommy Hilfiger saw that, they then said, oh my God, that's really fun. Let's do the same on the catwalk. So on the real catwalk, if you look at that show, there are large people, small people, blonde people, white people, fat people, thin people, kids, old people. It was that diversity that was possible in the metaverse inspired Tommy Hilfiger to kind of replicate some of that diversity in the real world. And that's what I mean. Like, what is the relationship between the real world and the metaverse? And, and for me, it's an absolute no-brainer. I mean, I'm very sort of skeptical about lots of technology in the short term, but I'm not skeptical about the metaverse. Yeah. I mean, it may be called something else, but until we stop living digital lives,
it's not going to happen, is it? No. We will. The separation between the real world and the online world, that line is blurred and blurred and blurred. And with the innovation of the Apple Vision Pro, right now it's iPhone 1 basic level. Yeah. When it gets to the Vision Pro 6 and 7, it's going to be a pair of glasses now.
I know, and the irony is I'm sort of wary of this, and the reason why I'm saying it's ironic is because I've been banging the drum of humanizing tech. Creating, blurring that line and making technology feel less like something that you strap onto your wrist, but something that folds itself into your life, and I still believe that. I do I am starting to worry, not worry, well, maybe I'm worrying, maybe I'm lying awake, stressing and fretting and worrying, but about the idea of, AI and life coaches and AI partners.
Yeah.
I'm starting to worry whether this notion of humanizing technology, whether AI isn't actually dehumanizing humanity using technology. And again, when you start putting the Vision Pro on, as you're now putting a physical barrier in between us, I just think there are conversations to be had. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad, but going back to that, what are the behaviors in the real world? And one of them is that idea of connection. Connection, in the real world is at the moment connection with real people. Life coaches, Vision Pros allows you to have those connections in the virtual world, and that's part of that conjoined hybrid world. But you don't. I would start to be worried if some of those relationships or those connections solely start to exist in one space but not the other.
Sure.
I remember taking the kids to see. I think Jared Lanier, who said he was the creator of VR. Extraordinary American guy. We went to see him in the Turbine Hall, at the Tank Rooms at the Tate. And he was asked, after he spoke about VR, the inevitable question about when will technology mean that digital is kind of cannot be discerned from real life.
Sure.
And he said, never. He said, I could have gone up and kissed him, which was unusual because he's an interesting looking chap with very long dreads and he's an interesting character.
I know who he is.
But he said, you'll take off the Vision Pro and you'll know you're back in the real world and real world's always going to be better. And I just could have shouted and sung. I'm a little bit skeptical about whether that's still the case. I'm a little bit skeptical about it. I'm just worried that my son would ever take those goggles off.
In the same way that we don't separate our phones from us anymore, we get anxiety if our Apple Watch is... No, we could do a whole part 2 on Web3, man. Web3 and then soon Web4 is scary. This has been awesome. It's been good to get lessons on building a company, on the future of technology, your predictions, on advice for people in fashion. Where do people go if they want to learn more about your company? What website should they visit?
Well, certainly, jump onto the website, holition.com. You'll have a look at some of the projects. I think a lot of the projects need an element of explanation. So if you are interested, reach out on LinkedIn, come over and have a cup of coffee. We talked about earlier the importance of conversation, exchanging ideas, two people coming together, having additional ideas. That's big for us. It's one of the reasons why we do a lot of work in the cultural space, because we work with artists, and artists have got, as a creative agency, if we silo ourselves off, we'll just keep regurgitating the same very cool ideas again and again and again. We all need kind of external input into the gene pool. So that comes from conversation. So if anybody wants a cup of coffee, we're in Holborn Circus, not too far from here, not that far from Covent Garden, halfway between trendy Shoreditch and less trendy Oxford Street. Just knock on the door, come on in, have a cup of coffee, meet some people, have a chat. And I think that's the important bit, right? We're human beings.
Jonathan, thank you. Hey, thanks for watching this podcast. Make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, etc., and I'll see you in the next episode.